What if I told you that winning World War II actually destroyed the winner? That Britain defeated Nazi Germany only to spend the next 60 years paying America for the privilege of surviving? Stay with me until the very end of this video, because the final payment date will absolutely shock you. This is the untold story of how the greatest empire in history was systematically dismantled, not by enemy bombs, but by its closest allies' checkbook. December 1940. London is burning. The Blitz is turning Britain's cities into hellscapes of rubble and flame. The Luftwaffe pounds Coventry, Liverpool, and the industrial heart of the nation. On the map, the British Empire still looks magnificent pink territories, covering a quarter of the globe. But deep in the underground war rooms of Whitehall, Winston Churchill knows a terrifying secret that cannot be whispered to the public. Britain is not just bleeding soldiers. It is bleeding to death financially. Churchill sits at his desk to write what might be the most humiliating letter of his career. The recipient? President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Churchill, the master of the English language, the man who turned speeches into weapons, now has to perform a delicate and degrading dance. He has to tell the leader of the world's richest nation that Great Britain, the empire that defeated Napoleon, the banker of the 19th century, the workshop of the world, is completely and utterly broke. The letter is long and detailed, describing strategic nightmares and desperate military needs. But the sting comes at the end. Churchill writes that the moment is approaching when the British Treasury will no longer be able to pay cash for the supplies needed to survive. The British people will fight on the beaches and the landing grounds, but they cannot fight without ammunition, and they can no longer afford to buy it. It is a plea for survival. It is an admission of insolvency. How did the wealthiest empire in history reach this point? The answer lies in the ruthless economics of total war. When war erupted in September 1939, Britain was still a financial titan, holding billions in gold reserves and owning railroads in Argentina, copper mines in Chile, and vast industrial concerns across the United States. But Hitler's war was different. It was a war of machines that consumed steel, oil, aluminum, and rubber at rates that defied all calculations. Britain had to import almost everything, and with Europe blockaded, they had to look across the Atlantic to America. Here's where it gets brutal. The United States was officially neutral. Congress had passed the Neutrality Acts with a clause called cash and carry. The law was simple and merciless. Britain could buy American supplies, but they had to pay cash immediately and transport goods on their own ships. No loans, no credit. Gold on the barrelhead before the crates left New York docks. For the first year, Britain drained its treasury to meet these demands. In a secret operation called Operation Fish, the British government loaded the entire gold wealth of the nation onto battleships and fastliners, shipping it across the dangerous Atlantic to vaults in Canada. It was the largest movement of physical wealth in history. Billions of dollars in gold bars sent into exile to pay American bill collectors. By late 1940, the gold was gone. The liquid cash was gone. The British Purchasing Commission in Washington had contracts on its desks that it could not sign because there were no dollars left. When Roosevelt received Churchill's letter, he understood the stakes. If Britain fell, America would be next. But he faced a political problem. He could not simply give money to Britain. American laws forbade it, and the public would be outraged. He needed to sell the war effort to American taxpayers. This is where Lend-Lease was born. Roosevelt explained it with a folksy analogy. If your neighbor's house is on fire, you don't haggle over the price of a garden hose. You lend him the hose, and he gives it back when the fire's out. It sounded simple. It sounded generous. But the reality behind closed doors in Washington was entirely different. It was not a conversation between neighbors. It was a foreclosure proceeding between a bank and a bankrupt client. The man in charge was Henry Morgenthau Jr., Secretary of the Treasury. He was anti-fascist and wanted to help Britain defeat Hitler. But he was also the guardian of American taxpayers. Before giving a single dime, he demanded Britain prove it had stripped itself of every last asset it possessed. Morgenthau demanded a full audit of the British Empire. He wanted to see every asset owned by the British government and every asset owned by private British citizens anywhere in the world. The value of every shell casing, every woolen sock, every share of stock. The British negotiators were stunned. They were being treated not as an ally fighting a common enemy, but as a failed company in receivership. The most painful symbol of this forced liquidation was American Viscose Corporation, the largest manufacturer of rayon and artificial silk in the United States. It was owned by a British company and was a jewel generating millions annually in dividends flowing back to London. The company was worth over $100 million. Morgenthau identified it as a target. He told the British, "Sell it." The British resisted, knowing a rushed wartime sale would be financial suicide. But Morgenthau held the leverage. Lend-Lease was making its way through Congress, and isolationists were attacking it. He needed proof that Britain was truly desperate. The ultimatum was cold: sell American Viscose or Lend-Lease dies in committee. On March 15, 1941, under immense pressure, the British government seized American Viscose from its owners using emergency war powers. The sale was handled by American investment bankers who knew Britain had no choice. They drove a merciless bargain. The company sold for roughly $54 million. It was theft. The company was worth at least double that amount. This was the moment the British elite realized the true price of this special relationship. They were not partners. They were a junior entity being stripped of assets to pay for survival. The United States was absorbing the wealth of the British Empire, not by conquest, but by contract. But it wasn't just industrial assets. Britain was desperate for destroyers. German U-boats were sinking merchant ships faster than British shipyards could replace them. Churchill begged Roosevelt for 50 old destroyers sitting in mothballs, obsolete and rusting. Roosevelt agreed to give them, but again, there was a price. In exchange for 50 barely seaworthy ships, the United States demanded 99-year leases on British naval and air bases from Newfoundland to the Bahamas, Jamaica, Trinidad, and British Guiana. Think about the scale of that trade. Britain gave the United States a strategic footprint covering the entire Western Hemisphere. They handed over the keys to the Korean and North Atlantic, allowing America to build military bases on British sovereign territory, bases that would project American power for a century, all for 50 old ships. It was a geopolitical fire sale. Britain was trading long-term strategic assets for short-term tactical survival. It was the act of a desperate nation, hawking the family silver to buy food. By March 1941, when the Lend-Lease Act was finally signed into law, Britain had been stripped clean. The gold was gone. The investments were being sold off. The bases were leased. The treasury was empty. But buried in the Lend-Lease agreement was a clause called Article 7, written in dense diplomatic language. It contained a poison pill for the British Empire. In return for aid, Britain agreed to dismantle its imperial preference system after the war, the economic wall holding the British Empire together. It was a system of tariffs favoring trade between Britain and its colonies, making British goods cheaper in empire markets than American goods. By signing Article 7, Britain was agreeing to tear down its own economic defenses, to open up the empire to American exporters. They were signing the death warrant of their own trading bloc. The British negotiators fought against it. They knew it meant the end of the empire as an economic unit. But German bombers were overhead. U-boats prowled the Atlantic. The cash was gone. They signed. August 15, 1945. Japan surrenders. World War II is over. In London, crowds gather outside Buckingham Palace, chanting for the king. Bonfires are lit. Strangers embrace in the streets. It is pure, unadulterated joy. The British Empire stood alone against darkness and prevailed. But across the Atlantic, in Washington, D.C., there is no sentimentality. Only a cold, bureaucratic machine waiting for this exact moment. 7 days after victory celebrations begin, President Harry Truman signs a piece of paper that devastates the British economy more effectively than any German bomb. He signs the order to terminate Lend-Lease. The cutoff is brutal and immediate. All aid stops. No transition period. No grace period. In the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, American Liberty ships, loaded with wheat, meat, and tools, bound for Liverpool, are ordered to turn around and sail back to the United States. The lifeline is severed. The British government is paralyzed by shock. John Maynard Keynes, the legendary economist, looks at the numbers and sees the abyss. Britain is importing half its food and almost all its raw materials, paying for them with Lend-Lease dollars. Without those dollars, Britain is bankrupt. Not in a year, not in a month, but instantly. There is only one option. Britain has to beg. In September 1945, a dying John Maynard Keynes boards a ship for Washington. He is sick, exhausted, suffering from a heart condition that will soon kill him. He is the greatest economic mind of the century, but he goes to America, not as an intellectual, but as a supplicant. Keynes believes he has a moral case. Britain fought alone for 2 years, while America remained neutral. Britain sacrificed its entire economy to save Western civilization. Therefore, the United States should give Britain a gift, a grant of $6 billion, not a loan, but retroactive payment for the blood and treasure spent holding the line. He calls it justice. But when he arrives in Washington, he finds that justice is not a currency the Americans recognize. The war is over. The American public is tired of paying for Europe. Politicians are suspicious of Britain's new Labour government, elected on a platform of socialism. But here is the revelation I promised you at the beginning. The shocking truth that will change how you see World War II forever. The Anglo-American loan of 1946, the money borrowed to keep Britain from starving after victory, was not a gift. It was a commercial debt with interest. Every year, for 6 decades, the British Treasury wrote a check to the United States Treasury. Through the boom of the 50s, the gloom of the 70s, the Thatcher years, and the Blair years, the payments continued. The final payment was made on December 29, 2006. Let that sink in. 60 years after the guns fell silent. 60 years after the victory parades. British taxpayers were still paying for the privilege of having survived World War II. A generation that never knew the war, that never heard the sirens, or felt the bombs, was still writing checks to America for their grandparents' survival. The story of the price of victory is the ultimate debunking of the idea that wars have winners. Germany lost and was destroyed, but Britain won and was bankrupted. The only true winner was the United States. The U.S. economy doubled during the war. Its industry was untouched by bombs. It held 2/3 of the world's gold. Through Lend-Lease and post-war loans, it successfully dismantled the British Empire's trading preferences, opening global markets for American goods. The United States didn't conquer the British Empire with armies. It bought it. It acquired the assets, the bases, and the geopolitical influence in a distressed asset sale managed by the U.S. Treasury. When Winston Churchill wrote that letter to Roosevelt in December 1940, he saved his country from Hitler. But he also signed the deed of sale. He traded the empire for survival. It was a deal that had to be made. There was no other choice, but the cost was the future. Britain emerged from the war as a moral giant, but an economic pygmy. It had spent its inheritance to buy freedom for Europe. It was a noble sacrifice, perhaps the noblest in history. But in the cold, hard light of economics, It was a liquidation. The empire didn't fall. It was sold off, piece by piece, to pay the bill for doing the right thing.